you. I don't like that.
So you guys are all being recorded now. Well, not physical, not video, but your voices are being recorded.
Hi everybody.
So you guys might be famous on YouTube. I've got one of my videos has 130, but that's all because of my chemistry class that just watched it. So for the longest time when it comes to life, we kind of all thought that life was perfect the way it was, and it didn't change. It was unchanging. A lion has always been a lion. An elephant has always been an elephant. A human has always been a human. There had always been a few scientists that were pretty radical, would propose ideas that animals were changed. Can you guys guess how that went over in the Middle Ages, the Renaissance period history?
Not good.
Not well.
Catholic Church did not like that.
It didn't go over well when people said that life wasn't fixed because it put a hole in the beliefs that had existed at that time. People didn't like change at that point. People still don't like change, but they're a little bit more open to it. So for the longest time, for most of human history, we've thought animals stay the same. We couldn't be farther from the truth. Then we had a couple scientists come around, but the main guy was Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. Has anyone ever heard of Lamarckian evolution? Kind of. Lamarck is kind of the first guy that openly publishes a scientific idea that animals change over time. So his idea was published in 1801, called The Theory of Inheritance of Acquired Characteristics. That phrase doesn't mean much, does it? Theory of Inheritance of Acquired Characteristics. So what his theory said is that animals change based on events that occur in their life. So what does that mean exactly? So he would compare it to a giraffe. So his theory said that giraffe, long time ago, 1,000 years ago, had short necks. Kind of a struggle to eat leaves from a tall tree if you have a short neck, right? A little out of reach. So the giraffe would stretch its neck as far as it could. As far as it could reach, it would stretch its neck. And it would just barely be able to get the leaves at the bottom of the tall tree. Because that giraffe stretched out its neck, he proposed that his offspring would have a slightly longer neck because his parent had stretched its neck a little bit farther. And over time, each individual giraffe stretches their neck a little bit farther and a little bit farther, and we end up with today long-necked giraffes. Seems kind of strange, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Why is this a thing?
Why would they just stop?
Why would they stop stretching their neck, right? Well, the argument for that could be they're still evolving. Giraffes might still be stretching their neck, or maybe they don't have to stretch their neck anymore because the trees aren't tall enough. So everyone kind of got that. How might this theory be disproved? Or what are some holes that we can kind of put into this theory? What are some ideas or thoughts that you have that could disprove this theory right off the bat?
Oh, usually from just moving, you don't permanently change,
Right.
How much you said, just because you stretch your neck doesn't mean your offsprings get the genes of a longer neck.
Right. Could you imagine, Cole, if you had to stretch your neck a little, because you're in the back of the class, you had to stretch your neck a little bit higher, and your offspring had really long necks because you stretched your neck a little bit longer? What? There's one argument that I could come up with, or a couple arguments that could really put a hole in this one pretty quick. Anyone know anyone that has an amputee?
Oh, I know somebody.
If I say I chopped off my hand, how would that put a hole in this?
Because you can't grow your hand back.
Well, I can't grow my hand back, but Lauren,
Kids aren't gonna not have.
right? So if you accidentally lose your hand or a finger or an eye, if this theory of Lamarckian evolution was true, your offspring wouldn't have a hand. Your offspring wouldn't have an eye because you lost it in your life. So now you genetically changed. So now your offspring won't have a hand or an eye. This wasn't accepted theory for very long. But the interesting part of it is that part of it we found is actually kind of true. So obviously, if I lose a hand, my offspring are still going to have a hand. That's not how our genetics work. But there are things that can happen in your life that can alter your own DNA. This summer, you guys have probably experienced this, right? So what's something you can do in the summer that can change your DNA? You can tan. You can get a physical tan. By the way, you guys know what a sunburn actually is?
Yeah, it's gonna have dead skin.
Well, it's a sunburn is your body's defense mechanism. Essentially, what it is your cells in your body are committing suicide because their DNA has changed.
Oh my!
So they commit suicide to save you because their DNA in those cells has been altered by ultraviolet rays. So they don't want to reproduce and cause other cells in your body issues or future cells. So they kill themselves to save you. The ultimate sacrifice. But in life, there are things in your DNA or that can cause your DNA to change. And you can pass that DNA on to your children.
So if they didn't kill themselves, is that how skin cancer and stuff is caused?
So sometimes what can happen, it's not a perfect system. Sometimes some cells get through, they make it through, and then that's where the skin cancer comes from. A sunburn is your body's attempt to save you from skin cancer. And obviously, most of the time it is successful, but not all the time. Sometimes it makes it through. So yeah, a teeny tiny part of Lamarck's theory is true. There are things you can do in your life that will directly affect your offspring, that you will pass on, just based on your genetic expression. It does change throughout your life based on what you're exposed to. Allison, what was your...
That was my question.
Okay. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So part of it's true, part of it's not. Now we get a guy by the name of Darwin. You guys have all heard of him. You've talked about him. What was he famous for, obviously?
He successfully proved the evolution.
Yeah, he came up with a theory of evolution. The theory of evolution by natural selection. He's kind of, well, he's a rock star.
Yeah.
For the early 1800s, the 1830s, 1840s, Charles Darwin is the definition of a rock star. He is against the older society. He doesn't really have a niche in life that he really enjoys. Kind of does his own thing. He didn't know where to go.
The man who revolutionized the theory of human evolution and completely changed everything we knew about our ancestors. Who was Charles Darwin?
He wasn't always old, I promise.
Charles Robert Darwin was born on February 12, 1809.
I promise most class, this will be the only history lesson class that we have. No.
From an early age, he was a very curious young man with a passion for nature.
You won't need to remember when he was born.
His father, Robert Darwin, was a healthy society doctor, and his grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, was a well-respected English physician, poet, and a natural philosopher. In Charles was only 8 years old, his mother died. And around that time, he started attending day school run by a local Anglican church preacher. In 1825, Darwin went to the University of Edinburgh Medical School, which at the time was considered the best medical school in the UK. He found lectures quite dull and the surgery very distressing. So in the second year, he left the university and went to private college.
Like
to become a clergy. At the time, his cousins and his brother also were studying. Darwin stayed at Cambridge until June 1831. 2 months later, he received an invitation to an expedition on the Royal Navy ship HMS Beagle, charting the coastline of South America. His father objected and didn't want him to go. Young Charles could not resist.
So, Darwin had a rough go of it early in life. And this is actually pretty typical of a lot of scientists where, for some reason, it's kind of like a Disney story where either their mother or their father died. I guess it was pretty common back then to lose a parent at some point in life. But Isaac Newton had the same kind of thing happen to him. But Darwin, mother died young, father and grandfather, both super intelligent individuals, wanted him to become a medical doctor. So, being from England, you have Oxford and Cambridge, two of the most prestigious schools, if not the most prestigious schools in the entire world. He goes to Oxford, or he went to Oxford. He went to Oxford first. Didn't like the medical stuff. He thought it was boring. So he switches and goes to Cambridge, and he starts pursuing a career in theology. He wanted to be a priest. Charles Darwin was a God-fearing man. He super religious, believed everything. It was great. That's who he was. But he ended up that didn't work out for him, and he actually ended up becoming a geologist. And he got the opportunity of a lifetime to go on the Beagle, the HMS, His Majesty's ship. So in 1831, he hops on this ship, the Beagle, and he goes around the world. And he's hired by this company, who has the captain, Robert Fitzroy, to draw, capture both species that are in the British Empire, bring them back to England so they can be studied, as well as the geologic history. So he drew a lot of rocks. That was actually his primary job, was to go and just draw mountains, draw rock features. He had studied life, but he wasn't a biologist by any means. He just was a good artist. By the end of the journey, he had managed to fill up the entire Beagle with specimens that he had collected, with actual organisms, life, animals, plants that he had collected. They were dead by this point. He had stuffed them, but he sent them back throughout this journey back to England. I think one of the times when he had sent specimens back, they actually got waterlogged and rotted the ship because they were so bad. I mean, it was a 5-year journey where he left England, went down to Africa, went down South America, went out the western side of South America, came to the Galapagos Islands, crossed over to Australia, came all the way back around. How many of you, given an opportunity, would go on a boat for 5 years and at this point not necessarily know if you're going to come back? You might get the opportunity.
I think it'd be fun. What about your mom? YOLO. She can come with.
So there's so much room on a boat. I mean, it's a big risk.
You could be known. You could be famous afterwards.
You could be famous, or you could just be like Most other sailors
And die.
well, not necessarily die, but you come back, nothing special happens, and you're good, or you get scurvy and don't make it back.
But your son's all grown up now.
But Darwin did it. He took the opportunity, went on a boat, 5 years, didn't think anything would really come of it. He just was looking for something to do because he didn't know what to do. Like I said, for his time, he was kind of lost. He had no idea what he wanted to do with his life. So first opportunity he took, he jumped on the HMS Beagle, went on his way. This is a quote directly from Darwin about the Galapagos Islands. And he said, "The archipelago is a little world within itself, or rather a satellite attached to America, whence it has derived a few stray colonists and has received the general character of its indigenous populations." There's a lot of big words in there.
Whence.
Whence. We don't say whence anymore. This is 1800s English. What is this telling you? What do you get from this phrase? What sticks out? What is Charles Darwin trying to say?
That it's very much different than everything else, and it's very isolated because it's a little world.
Yeah,
itself.
He's talking about the Galapagos here. The Galapagos, especially in the 1831, 1832, is completely isolated from South America. There isn't a lot of travel going from mainland South America to the islands. It's its own world. It's isolated, completely isolated. And the individuals there are stray colonists. What does stray colonists mean? Or what do you think he's saying here about stray colonists? I know this isn't an English class either, but
Maybe like people like don't have like they don't have like a group. They're just kind of like
they don't have a group.
they're like native.
They're native, or they're native to the islands. You're saying?
Yeah.
So where do you think the animals on the Galapagos today and then? Where do you think their ancestors came from? Do you think they just spontaneously popped up on the Galapagos Islands, like life just was created on the Galapagos Islands? Where would life have to come from?
A boat, maybe.
There wasn't any boats going to and from the island at that point. Huh? Maybe some of them came from the water.
The continental drift or whatever.
Not necessarily continental drift, not like the Ice Age, the movie. The continents don't move that fast.
Well, I mean, like,
Has anyone seen?
animals from like the big island or whatever, and then like the island scooped over or whatever.
The islands are volcanic islands. They're like Hawaii. They have active volcanoes on them. They're in the middle of the ocean. They're produced from a volcano. They didn't come from the mainland. Has anyone seen the movie Castaway?
Yeah, with the volleyball
With the volleyball?
and Tom Hanks.
So, to get animals on an island that's in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, it's hundreds of miles from South America. The animals literally have to float there, accidentally.
How did That's kind of funny.
Well, and most of the time it doesn't work, right? So, does anyone know any animals that are common to the Galapagos Islands?
Finches.
Finches are common. How might a finch get there? A finch could fly there accidentally. A stray gust of wind blows it all the way there, but it makes it there.
Like a bunch of miles.
It's completely accidental. It's not intentional that they fly that way.
It's like
Most of the time when this type of thing happens, where these stray colonists, most of them die. They just get a very small few get lucky enough where they actually find land and survive.
Oh, that's sad.
So the finches made it there. What else is the Galapagos known for?
Lizards.
Galapagos tortoises. Some of the largest and I think the largest tortoise on the planet lives on a teeny tiny island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, off of South America. What are tortoises not good at?
Speed.
I like both S words, speed and swimming. How would a tortoise get from South America to the Galapagos Islands if it can't swim? Float on what? It's gonna sink.
Driftwood.
Driftwood. So a tortoise crawls. Let's think about. So let's say there's a cliffside, right? There's a cliffside. Dead trees all along that cliffside. One day, a tortoise from the mainland, a small tortoise from the mainland, decides, I'm going to climb up onto this dead limb. Too much weight on that limb, what's going to happen to it? It's going to snap and fall into the ocean, and now that tortoise is sitting on that log,
And he's on his way.
floating around.
This was a good idea.
This happens a lot,
That's so.
but most of the tortoises don't get lucky enough to make it to the island.
That sucks.
And they drown or they starve,
Oh,
dehydration, stuff like
that's
that.
not as cool.
Very few make it. Enough where a population can make it.
Oh, I have a question.
Yeah.
Where's like fresh water on the island?
There's freshwater springs on the island plus rainfall. It's a tropical region.
Oh, look at that cute lizard. He's like so fat.
So a couple species that the Galapagos are known for. We already talked about finches. We talked about the tortoises. Now, my favorite are the iguanas. So there's two main species of iguanas that call the Galapagos home. It's also home to the only species of marine iguana, aquatic iguana. So the iguanas came from the mainland just like the tortoises did. Their cousins can't swim. They don't live in water. They crawl on a log falls into the ocean, they float, and luckily make it to the island. And enough of them make it to the island where they can reproduce and have a population. Is it going to work very well for an individual iguana if it alone makes it there?
No.
No, because what's going to happen to that iguana over time?
It's gonna get old and it doesn't have anything to reproduce.
It's going to get old, it's going to die. So you have to not only get lucky enough to make it to the island, you have to get lucky enough where a second iguana of the opposite sex makes it to the island. And then you have a pair of iguanas that can reproduce if they land on the same island, because the Galapagos Island has multiple islands. If they land on the same island, or even if they're on the same island and they just happen to run into each other. So this has to occur quite a bit. There's a lot of trial and error that can happen when not just the Galapagos Island, but any island chain you're trying to populate it with life. It's quite often for species on islands to go extinct because there's not enough mates there, not enough rain happens, a drought occurs, there's not enough food, there's overpopulated, a new species shows up. There's a whole bunch of stuff that can go wrong. Like I was saying, the Galapagos Islands is a volcanic or island chain. The oldest islands are to the right in the picture there. So that really small island in the bottom right, that's the oldest island. The volcano is no longer active, so it's not producing new land. What's going to happen to that island if the ocean keeps beating on it?
It's gonna erode.
It's going to erode away. Eventually, it will disappear into the ocean. If I were to add another picture to the right here and go beneath the ocean, you would actually be able to see old islands just beneath the surface. Because this is all due to continental drift. As the continent drifts, the plate that the islands are on drifts, the volcano moves, making new islands. The biggest island there, Isabella, that's still growing. There's 3 volcanoes on that island. They are active. And that island is still growing. Largest island there. There are 56 total species on the Galapagos Islands. 27 of them, so just under half of those species, of those 56, are endemic species. Does anyone have an idea what endemic means?
Doesn't mean they can move around.
They all can move around. They're all terrestrial. They're not all terrestrial. There are some aquatic, but they all have the ability to move. That's part of the definition of life. Is all living things have the ability to move. What do you think endemic would be? Why would it be special to this island or any island chain for that matter? Cole?
They evolved to live on that island.
They evolved on that island. There are 27 species. Yeah. There are 27 species on the Galapagos Islands that are found nowhere else on the planet. They exist nowhere else. They exist on this teeny tiny island chain, middle of the Pacific Ocean, with no other access to it. So if these islands disappear, or these islands have other issues, say a tsunami comes, wipes the islands out, forest fire, stuff like that, easily 27 endemic species found nowhere else on the planet extinct. Happens all the time with island biology. It's one of the reasons why ecology or any biologists in general find island biology really interesting, because you can see some really cool evolution patterns occur on islands. And we'll explain why in a couple weeks when we start talking about niches and we dig really deep into island biology. But a lot of cool things happening on islands. This is just a drawing of the Galapagos when Darwin showed up, kind of tracking where the beagle went. I think the islands were named differently back then, though. Or this is written in Spanish, one of the two. Because this island is not this name, it's Isabella. But so I think they've changed the names over time. Like we talked about, the Galapagos Darwin most known for his finch collection. Over the month that Darwin was there, he collected and categorized and logged and discovered 13 unique species of finches. He caught them, killed them, stuffed them, sent them back to England. You can still see these finches today. They're in Oxford. He sent them back to Oxford. If you go to Oxford in England, they still have his finches, his specimens that he sent back to England on display there. When he first saw these finches, they all look completely different from each other. This is one of his original drawings. You guys have probably seen it in biology before or life science. Some point you've seen this drawing. These are his personal drawings. What's the differences between all these birds?
Their beaks.
Their beak size. Because of their beak size and their color patterns that he sees, he doesn't actually think they're all finches. He thought they were all individual species of sparrows, finches, warblers. There were a whole bunch of different birds. He did not realize that they were all finches. It wasn't until he got back to England to study his specimens that he collected that he figured out, hey, these are all members of the finch family. And not only that, it was studying these beaks, studying these birds, that he first came up with the idea of natural selection and evolution. It was through these birds that he realized that they all had to share a common ancestor, because they're all the member of a finch family at one point, especially since it's on an island. A single species of finch managed to fly its way to the Galapagos Islands and reproduce. So millions of years ago, hundreds of thousands of years ago, if we went to the Galapagos Islands, we would have found one species of finch with a large population. Each island has its own unique species of finch. Why do you think that would be, that each island would have its own unique species of finch?
The birds ate different foods on each island.
The birds had different food sources on each island. What do you think a big beak would be good for?
Cracking nuts.
Cracking nuts. If you want to crack a nut, you got to have a powerful jaw. That little guy, number 4 there, do you think he's going to survive very well on an island that has a large amount of nuts and not much else? Nope. He is going to go extinct like that, because he is not going to be able to survive, because he's not going to be able to eat. The big finch there, you're on an island with nuts and you got a big beak, yeah, you're going to survive pretty well. If you live on an island with only small seeds on it, do you think that first bird with that big beak is going to live very well? Small seeds? No. That big beak has its downfall. It's not very good at being precise, making precise movements, picking up small things. So having a smaller beak size would be beneficial to you. It'd be supported on that island because the seeds are smaller. Maybe on some of the islands there's a large population of insects. Having a small beak would be better for that than a large beak. So we can see these different types of beaks based on what island that finch was found on at that time. What happens if, say, the island has that large beak bird there, that large beak finch? That island, all the trees that produce large nuts get blown over in a storm and they die, and the trees die. What's going to happen to that large beak finch? It's going to go extinct. You're not going to see that population of large beak birds on that island anymore. You'd start to see what for the beak size? You'd start to see smaller and smaller beaks. Because the offspring of the large beak finches, not all of them might have large beaks. Some might have larger beaks, some might have smaller beaks. The individuals, the offspring that have the smaller beak, have the ability to survive at a higher rate. They have a higher fitness, we call it, than their brothers and sisters that have a larger beak. So we could easily support smaller and smaller beaks as time goes on, as individuals reproduce. So when Darwin gets back, he does almost nothing with his research for a long time. It wasn't until 1859 he decided to do something with his research. Does anyone have an idea why it would have taken him so long? It didn't take him that long to come up with the idea of evolution.
He didn't want to make like the church or anything angry.
He was afraid of what people would think. He was terrified. He went to these islands. He went on this incredible journey, logged animals around the world, plants around the world, discovered a whole bunch of new species that he named himself. Quickly, after going back to England, makes his observations, comes up with the idea of evolution by natural selection. He holds on to it because he doesn't want to freak everybody out. An idea like evolution, an idea like, oh my God, species are constantly changing. We haven't been the same. There's no perfect form. That's radical. Some people today still think it's radical. The only reason he publishes this essay, his study, his theory, the only reason he does it, his pupil decides, hey, if you don't publish it, I will. His pupil was just about ready to publish it. Darwin decides, okay, I want credit for this. So he goes ahead and he releases The Origin of Species in 1859. Do you think it went over very well? No. People still think Darwin and see Darwin as the anti-Christian. He was a very religious man. He did not want to destroy the church. He didn't want his theory to do that. But it changed everything. It changed the way we view biology. It changes the way we view the world. This book is arguably one of the greatest pieces of science history, human history, that has ever been created, ever been written. Because it changed everything like that. It changed everything overnight. The two ideas in this book, the two main ideas that he proposed, evolution occurs by natural selection. A trait is supported or not supported in life. The trait that is supported, those individuals pass on their DNA, they produce more offspring, their DNA lives on through multiple generations. A trait that is not supported is quickly removed because they don't survive. Either they don't hide well, they don't eat well, they're not fast enough. Those traits are eliminated from a population with traits that have higher fitness, a higher ability to survive. The second part of it, and this was what made this book so radical, was that all organisms descended from one single common ancestor. What does that mean? What does that mean for people?
That we evolved and we weren't just created out of nothing.
Yeah, we didn't come from nothing. Nothing can come from nothing. We descended from one common ancestor. That's what this book said. That's what the theory of evolution, the origin of species said. And that's why it was so radical. All organisms descended from a common ancestor. All life on Earth originated from a common ancestor. Darwin was the first guy to propose this. It hadn't been thought of before. People didn't want to think of this before. It was a big step. People didn't like it. People still don't like it. Because of this idea, a single common ancestor. All life is originated from a single common ancestor. If you take elephants and a lion, two completely different species, both mammals, one's a predator, one is not. We go back far enough back in time, millions of years ago, hundreds of millions of years ago, we could find a common ancestor that both elephants and lions descended from. Same thing with whales and peanuts. Whales, the blue whale, the largest organism that has ever lived on this planet. You can trace back through time, has a common ancestor with a peanut. Something that big. To the largest animal on the planet that weighs 65 tons. 1 ton is 2,000 pounds. The heart on it can fit, the heart on a blue whale, you can have a Volkswagen, you can fit a Volkswagen Beetle inside of it. The aorta, the main artery that pumps out of the heart, a 6-foot tall human can stand inside and walk through, has a common ancestor with a peanut. Can you imagine why this was so radical? Why the origin of species caused and changed the way we think completely? this is how we can kind of think about it. Birds. Birds are descended from dinosaurs. They share a common ancestor with dinosaurs. This is kind of how we show a common ancestor, or we can display a common ancestor. This is called a phylogenetic tree. The end of each line represents an individual species, living or extinct. In this case, the only animal that's alive in this image is a bird, or birds. If we go back in time, we find this first point right here. This represents right here, this point represents an extinct species, an animal that once lived, or an organism that once lived. At this point, we go back far enough, a bird has a common ancestor with a velociraptor. Birds did not evolve from velociraptors, but if you go back far enough, they have a common ancestor right here at this point. Okay? You can do the same thing. You can keep going back. We have a Stegosaurus, or a family of Stegosaurus, a cousins. You go back, a Stegosaurus shares a common ancestor with a bird. If you go back far enough, and you can keep doing that. Here is the extreme version that charts all life in every form that we know of that has ever existed on the planet. This is the tree of life, almost a complete tree of life. Every branch represents a different species of living organism. We have bacteria. We start way back here. Bacteria, archaea, eukaryotes, meaning they have nucleuses, plants, fungi, protozoans, echinoderms, fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals way down here. Life's incredible, guys. And the fact that at one point, way back here, around 3.5 billion years ago, we have a common ancestor right here. A single-celled organism started life. Do we know where that single-celled organism came from? We don't have any idea. We don't know what started it all. Some people propose that life formed on Earth. Possible. Some people propose that life came from another planet, meaning there was an asteroid or a comet that had bacteria on it, landed on Earth. Earth was able to support life at that time. And it multiplied and kept going. Any questions on that part? But this is how we can track back any species that's alive today, any species that has ever lived, we can track back to this organism right here, the very first one. This will be the last slide here. Evolution by natural selection. The second part of Darwin's book, Origin of Species, is a process by which organisms change over time as a result of changes in heritable physical or behavioral traits. Basically, he's saying here that we change based on changes in our DNA. DNA that creates an individual that has a higher fitness, a higher ability to survive in a certain ecosystem, produces more offspring, passes on its DNA. An organism that has a low fitness, does not support it, does not do well in the ecosystem, dies off, that DNA is eliminated from the ecosystem, it's eliminated from the tree of life. We can think of this with polar bears. What color is their fur? White. If we go back far enough and we find a common ancestor, polar bear fur was not always white. Polar bear fur was originally brown, but they still lived in the Arctic. Can you imagine how well a brown bear does in eating and feeding in an ecosystem that is completely white? Not good. Are you going to sneak up on anything? White background with a brown dot coming at you? You're not going to do well. There was a mutation in their DNA at some point where a single offspring had white fur. Just a random mutation. Every one of us is a mutant. Every one of us has DNA that is a mutation. Sometimes it's supported and helps out. Sometimes it does the opposite. Polar bear DNA, one individual had a mutation in its DNA, created white fur. That organism, that individual polar bear with that white fur, how do you think it fed hunting-wise? In a white background, in a white ecosystem. A lot better. You can get a lot closer when you got white fur than if you have brown fur. You're going to sneak up a lot easier on your prey. Which means you survive because you're not hungry anymore. You're getting the food you need. You can reproduce with other organisms. Your offspring that have white fur survive. The offspring that have brown fur die because they don't sneak up on prey as easily. That was a lot. Thoughts, questions? Anything at all? I love these questions. I like to answer questions about evolution. Okay. If you have any questions about this at some point, let me know. Wednesday, I am going to have you get in a group, it could be 2 or 3. I am going to have you pick a species, any species you want. I want you to come up or trace back and find 5 ancestors of that species. So we'll do that on Wednesday. Thursday, we're going to talk about, you guys are going to have a lab about how tuskless elephants have evolved. And then Friday, we're going to discuss what you guys found, what information you guys found from the Wednesday lab. Okay? Next week, we're going to get into ecosystems. Have a good rest of your day. Go off the light.
It's so like, it feels like it's spring.